It'll be on our Facebook. Yeah, so it
Okay.
records.
All right. Yes. I'll be quiet now.
Oh, I'll tell you when it goes live, or we'll see. But
All
it
right.
should be. Let's see. All right, we're ready. Welcome. My name is Virgil Moorhead Jr., the Behavioral Health Director of Two Feathers Native American Family Services, and also part of the Big Lagoon Rancheria, which is Yurok and Talawa. And we are on Two Feathers Virtual Indigenous Speaker Series. It's a wonderful day up here in Humboldt County, sunny, probably in the 60s or 70s. And before I introduce my colleague and our wonderful guest today, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are on Wiyot land here at Two Feathers, and we wanted to pay honor and respect to the Wiyot people. And we also want to, let everyone know that, we stand in solidarity with the other organizations, people of color, and those that are in the good fight for social justice and equity. And so with that, I'm going to introduce or throw it over to my colleague, Shoshone, for her to introduce herself, and then we'll introduce our guest today.
Hi, Ayukwi. I'm Shoshone. I am a mental health therapist here at Two Feathers, and I work in the Checks Hope for Tomorrow program. And there's 6 therapists here that work closely with our cultural mentors, work with our RAP program that help provide services for families. I specifically work with children ages 10 to 18, providing individual therapy for the community in Humboldt County. So I'm going to throw it back over to Virgil, and then he'll introduce our guest.
So yes, our guest today is Dr. Darsha Narvaez, and she is a professor of psychology at the University of Notre Dame. Her work examines how, much of her work examines how early life experience, the evolvedness influences moral function and well-being in children and adults. She's done a lot of work within Indigenous communities, such as doing a conference. She is an award-winning author, including the awesome book, Neurobiology and the Development of Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom. Of note, her prior careers include being a musician, classroom teacher, business owner, and human resource developer. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Virgil. Great to be with you and your whole group. I'm really honored to be here. Taino T. I have Puerto Rican ancestry, and we have Native ancestry there, and we assume it's Taino. So the spirit be with you all. And I'm very happy to have been at Notre Dame, on the land of the Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi. And I recognize their wonderful stewardship over the many centuries. So, and other Indigenous folks that had to move, right? And all the things we don't know, but I honor all our relations today. And I'm very humbled to be with you. And I hope now that you will take my words as suggestions, as insights that have been provided to me. And I hope they will help the audience as well. Shall I share my PowerPoint now?
Yes. So the plan will be for Darsha to do a 45, 50-minute presentation, and then we'll have questions at the end. And for the audience that are tuning in on Facebook, you could ask questions on the comment section of Facebook, and then we'll bring it into dialogue conversation after the presentation.
And thank you, Virgil, and thank you, Shoshone, for welcoming me. So my talk today is about fostering Indigenous wisdom. This is something our ancestors all did, and we have forgotten in recent centuries in the globalization that we have today about how to do that. So let's discuss what that means. So I have several kind of chapters here, just a quick mention of the current situation, which I think you all know, and how we got here, what a nested childhood looks like, and what healing looks like. So let's look at the current situation very briefly. What's happening to people? I think we all feel this, as well as if you look at the data, you know, there's more mental illness and violence, drug addiction, and suicide. Lifespans are shrinking in the United States. People under age 55 are at health disadvantage. Child well-being tends to rank near the bottom of all advanced nations, the US well-being of children. And our empathy and our narcissism is decreasing. Narcissism and insecure attachment are rising. So these are issues that show there's something very fundamentally wrong. And many of our efforts actually don't address the problem and almost exacerbate it in our planet. So we have the 4 horsemen of the environmental apocalypse now: massive toxification of all the earth, water, soil, air, food chains, degradation of the atmosphere, global warming going on, switched by the powers that be to climate change to make it sound less scary. And then the death of birth, the extinction of millions of species. And I think we all feel this in our hearts. It drags us down because we feel almost powerless to do anything about it. But here we are, and we are gifted with the gifts we need to get through this time period. And we are here for a reason. And our purpose is to help people flourish, I think, and find those purposes we all have, our unique gifts to the world. Noam Chomsky mentioned some years ago that the grim prognosis for life on the planet is the consequences of just a few centuries of forgetting what traditional societies knew and what the surviving ones still recognize. So these are the First Nations, the indigenous peoples of the world, the native peoples who know in their traditions how to live sustainably and well. And so how do we get here to this kind of off the path, off the trail, off the path to flourishing? What's been forgotten? What do sustainable indigenous societies have to teach the modern world? What do they know from all the ancestral and elder wisdom that they've passed on over the generations? And what do we need to make sure to sustain in the years ahead? Well, the fundamental belief and understanding is that we belong to the earth, that we are not the owners of the earth. The earth, essentially, we're just one of many creatures that belong here. That part of this indigenous worldview is to understand that nature is alive. Everything has sentience, has a consciousness of some sort, that nature is a partner, that we are related always in a web of life, and to live well is to live in harmony with cyclical nature. So native mind is a mind in relational activity, a mind in community. And we have certain duties then to live well, and that is to foster the heart, mind, spirit. You can't separate them really. I mean, the dominant institutions tend to do this. They just want the kids to go to school and just remember things with their intellect, right? Forget your heart, forget your spirit, forget your emotions, forget your connections to nature. Don't look out the window, don't hear the birds singing, right? So some schools are changing that to foster heart, mind, and spirit, but that is one of our heritages. Another is to perceive our interconnection to all humans and other than humans, that we are always having an effect on our relations. So we need to be careful then to dedicate ourselves to connecting in caring and respectful ways in every instant and activity. And we'll talk about healing, indigenous healing practices later. So we forgot what healthy adulthood looks like, and I'll have another slide later too about this, but a healthy adult in our heritage shows the moral sense. Even Darwin noted this. He noted that people in nomadic foraging societies display these characteristics, whereas his compatriots, British men especially, did not. So what is it they have? They have social pleasure, they enjoy being with others, they have empathy, they remember what they promised yesterday and whether they fulfilled that promise to the community. They're concerned for the opinion of others. They build habits to fit in when necessary. We can also add to his list higher consciousness and awareness of transcendence, of being connected to the universe, a connection to the natural world, all our relations, and a sense of an ecological self, something beyond the individual, that we are all connected to this larger self. Everything is connected. And we see this kind of mindset or orientation. It's called pre-conquest consciousness by some. In all these societies around the world, small band hunter-gatherer societies, they still exist. They've been around for all of our history, and the civilized world that usually is covered by history classes is only 1%, less than 1% of our human genus history. So in these societies, they're foragers, there are few possessions. They don't care about possessions. When the Europeans came to the Americas, they were astounded that the tribes they met, the natives they met, weren't concerned about money or getting stuff. You know, it was like, well, and they talked about how do we make them reliant on money, right? So these groups are immediate return societies. That means they use up what's there. They don't cultivate plants, domesticate animals, or accumulate resources. Now there's different kinds of societies that still are going to, that are more settled among First Nation and Native communities. And they're going to still have these characteristics that I'm going to talk about shortly. But these foraging societies are still in existence worldwide, of course, under duress. These are, the adults are characteristically generous, calm, and cooperative with others. So you can see the personalities that they have are quite different from what we expect is normal for adults. And you can see in these societies, and this again, it was going to include more than the foragers, the more complex hunter-gatherer societies as well. They have a companionship lifestyle. They live with multiple ages all the time. There's no central authority, no formal leaders that drove the Europeans crazy when they invaded because they couldn't find the leader, right? And there's no strong out-group bias. They were welcoming to outsiders initially until they found out how mistreating they were. And high autonomy, so really high group orientation, high solidarity, but also high autonomy, which means they could do what they wanted, no coercion. And a gift economy, which is how the natural world operates, right? You take and give, take and give, take and give, depending, your waste is some animals' food, for example. So small egos and large selves. So these are very strange notions to the European kind of society that we usually see today, the European Enlightenment worldview. So these, there's really, Robert Redfield identified really two contrasting worldviews in the world. There's the unified, the original, the indigenous, the baseline on the right, the green, where spirit pervades all things. We're mutually related with everything, and we're the younger siblings. We have so much to learn from the trees, the mosses, the animals around us in our landscape. And in this worldview, you feel at home on the earth. You learn your place, you learn your landscape, and you fit yourself in with that, and you share. You're always sharing and gifting and being generous. The left side then is what's happened over the last couple hundred years, but especially since the 17th century. Because in Europe, there were the right side of the diagram is the parent too, in many of the communities around Europe. But then when the dominators come in, right, they fragment everything, they disenchant, they want to control, and they bring about this worldview that only humans have spirit, only humans really matter, humans are the best, the pinnacle, whether it's evolution or creation, they're on top, right? And then you have these characteristics of restlessness, not feeling at home on the earth, and wanting to change and control and conform landscapes to some ideals they have, and then the hoarding of resources. So this is the stuff that's happened to us. And these ghost theories then haunt us, and they push us to wetico, that cannibalism, the exploitation of life. You can see the British Empire actually planted all this all over the world, and globalization, capitalism continues it all. So I won't read through those. So we forgot our heritage, and our baselines have shifted. You can see number 1 here are child raising practices. Matter because they build, number 2, the individual psychosocial neurobiology. And that matters because that child turns into an adult in the way the adult functions in their morality, how open-hearted they are, how open-minded they are, how flexibly attuned they are to others is shaped by number 2. And then those adults shape the culture. They create the culture that comes out of their own shaping from prior generations. So this is a cycle, and we'll see that there's one way to go or the other way. But first, let's understand that number 1, why are early child rearing practices so important? Well, because young children are really needy. They're born 9 to 18 months early compared to other animals. We look like fetuses in many ways until 18 months of age. So there's a lot of care and nurturing that's needed. And they're only born with 25% of the brain volume of adults. And most of what's growing in that first 2 years, that's really important for the moral sense I mentioned earlier, for empathy, for higher consciousness, for connection, is the right hemisphere, the right brain development. Most of that initially starts before age 2. So you really need a lot of care then. The immune system takes about 6 years to develop, and so breast milk's really important for a long time. And we're so plastic initially. Genes are turned on and off by our experience. So you might be born with some genes, but it's just a roadmap. It's a blueprint. It doesn't actually get activated unless you've had the right experiences. And we are set up to be compassionate people, but we have to have the experiences that turn on the genes and turn on shape our plasticity for compassion. So we have lots of sensitivities in early body, brain, and mind development. We need an external womb, exterogestation. So we know that instead of having nature versus nurture, it's actually a constant interaction because the baby's a different baby 5 minutes from now. And so you have to keep what I'm going to tell you about the evolved nest, the nurturing system, you have to keep it going. You can't just put the baby down and assume, I hugged it long enough today. No, you got to keep doing it because that's what the baby expects that external womb of caring and nurturing while it's developing thousands of synapses of connections among neurons per second. So if you leave the baby to cry, you are undermining then the development that's supposed to be happening. So there's so many epigenetic effects, and we are dynamic systems. So the first initial conditions for a dynamic system affect which way the trajectory goes. So if it's a very stressful early life, the trajectory is just, you're not going to be as alive as you're not going to flourish. You're not going to develop your true self as easily as someone who gets their needs met in the way I'm going to talk about in a moment. So we are biosocially constructed. Our biology is shaped by the kind of social experience we have. And then our social capacities are based on our biology. So if we get off on the wrong track, it's really hard to get us back to our true self trajectory, to find that gift that we've been given and develop it well. You got to deal with all this garbage that got collected because of the stress. So all sorts of things are happening together: emotions, cognitions, your view of the world, what you think of yourself. If you're really stressed as a baby, you're going to have a very poor sense of self. You weren't attended to, and so you think, oh, it's my fault. That's what babies do. That's what young children do. They blame themselves for their neglect, and then it's really hard to face the pain, and they tend to then blame somebody else. So you can blame Black people or women or immigrants, whatever it is, because the brain is shaped to not be open and flexible. It's tight and scared, right? So your social worldview is really shaped also in this early time. So at birth, we've got survival systems: fear, panic, and anger. These are innate. They keep us alive. And then other forms of other capacities grow, but they have to have the experience with other people. You create me, I create you. We co-construct, co-create each other, and it's especially true for babies. Babies and young children need to feel that love and that grace and that empathy, reverence for their being, and they will develop then the higher order moral capacities, their social capacities. So these are really ethical issues. It's a moral issue. It's ethical to provide what babies need because they will carry that imprint for the rest of their lives. And it's unethical then what we say to deny babies what they need. So here are pictures of traditional societies. Notice now all the touching and carrying, that's normal for young children, even to age 4 or 5, you know, they're being carried. What happens when you shift and treat young children this way? Pretty isolated, not very much attention, physically separated. Well, this is what's represented then and what's happened to us. Number one, there's undercare. So I'm going to show you what that means, what good care looks like. So we have developmentally inappropriate child rearing in child care, which leads to a poor development of neurobiology, to adults with ill-being and limited capacities. And then they degrade the culture because the adults are so distracted, overwhelmed, or over control. They can't give themselves to children. They cannot be open and hearted because of the damage. And this can be undercare. It can also be trauma, and intergenerational trauma as among Native communities is going to be part of how this has shifted also in the wrong direction. But so what happens, I'm still on the negative stuff. We'll get to the positive in a moment. So what happens when you don't provide a species normal developmental system? You're going to have a species atypical outcome. So all the stuff we see now in the US especially is because we're so poor at taking care of young children and don't think. We want to control them and keep them quiet and all that. So you end up with people who are outside the range of intelligence and effectiveness. This is the degraded developmental system, and it's pretty unethical. And this is what it looks like then in the body. You can see that picture on the right is a normal sized slice of a 3-year-old's brain, and then the one that's been neglected, and you see the one that's been neglected is very much smaller. And there's malformation then throughout the systems of the body, the stress response, immune system, endocrine system. All these systems are underdeveloped or misdeveloped, and then they're going to affect your capacities later to get along with others, to think well, to feel your feelings, to be connected. And you can see then just the picture is nice. That's why I have it here. On the right side is a brain. The middle picture, that lump there is a neuron, a brain cell. And then all the threads there are connections to other neurons. And a well-functioning brain, a healthy brain will look like the left side, and a poorly functioning brain will look on the right side. And the right side happens when you've been stressed too much at the wrong times and goes on and on. It melts synapses for babies. So it melts those connections. And so you end up with depression and all sorts of other issues as a result. Our evolved brain function is to, so there's 3 basic global mindsets. The first one is the survival systems, the ones we're born with, and then the others have to grow. And with good growth, the executive functions, our ability to control our feelings, our physiological aspects, but also our social and behavior and all sorts of controls. With good development, they end up controlling the survival systems. And you spend your time in what's grown after birth. So a lot of caring and love and play, and then the using your imagination, your abstracting capacities to think about communally what possibilities there are. But when you have a lot of toxic stress in early life, it's going to lead you, this is what happens with stress. The stress response floods your body and moves the blood flow to your muscles so you can run. It moves the blood flow away from your higher order thinking, away from the brain, the executive functions, and it just floods you with the panic or fear, anger, and that under poor development, it will control your executive functions. That will happen because you didn't have good environment good support. And then you're ending up with a personality that's easily stressed, and you just shrink in a way. You shrink away from being social. Maybe you never grew your sociality, your ability to play, care for others. And there you are. We have a whole country full of people like this, I think. And what happens is if in the center there is neuroception by situation. So in each situation, you look at whether you feel safe or unsafe, the bottom words. You do this subliminally, subconsciously. Do I feel safe or unsafe? And if you feel safe, you move towards engagement and openness. And with good supportive development, you'll be very skilled at attuning to others and flexibly approaching. With a poor early environment, you'll tend to go to the right there, the unsafe side. You'll feel threatened a lot and you'll be defensive. You'll brace yourself against others instead of being open to them. And you will then mobilize the fight-flight response or the freeze-faint, depending on how severe your trauma was or under care. But you can also move into these two positions, one or the other, by the stories you tell yourself, what you've been taught. So that's the executive function approach there. So if you've been taught that green people are all scary and you see a green person, then you're going to go into that right side, the defensive side, for example. So how is it now, finally, how is it do healthy societies develop their young? And what is our indigenous heritage? All right, so we all have a nest. We all have a developmental system for raising the young, and you're going to get a smart, effective creature when you provide that. And our indigenous history is to provide that with pleasure. So what does the nested childhood look like? We call it the evolved nest for short, evolved developmental niche for long. That's a more official term. It's just a mouthful. It's got 9 practices that we've identified. We keep adding things, so let's just go through them quickly. First is the soothing perinatal experiences. So this is during pregnancy and birth, to not be stressing the child, to not induce pain, to not separate the mom and baby. So it's calm and welcoming environment and following the natural rhythms of the mother and child, and no interference with timing. And unfortunately, we've developed a medical system where we interfere all the time, and mothers over generations lose their kind of intuitive sense of how to have babies. And so we have a lot of things kind of out of whack on this component. Number 2 is on request breastfeeding. Breastfeeding has just tons of ingredients, thousands of ingredients. We hardly understand it. And our history is to provide at least 2 years, if not more. The average age of weaning is 4 years old. As I said, the immune system, I know it's a shocker. What? 4-year-old. But one of the reasons is the immune system takes that long or more to develop, and breast milk provides everything you need for that immune system, all the building blocks. And so there's tons of things that breast milk does. It improves myelinization of the coating of the neurons, so better communication, so more intelligence, and various other positive things. Usually most of the research you hear about, they're comparing 3 months of formula versus 3 months of breast milk, and that's like hardly anything, right? And they're fine differences. So if you had it 4 years, think how smart we'd all be. Then there's positive touch. So moving touch, no negative touch. Mammals need touch to grow well and synthesize DNA. We've got long-lasting health benefits here, and promotes healthy sleep and adaptive arousal, cognitive functioning, calming. Touch is really, really important. And we know it's good for all ages. All of us need hand holding or cuddling. My husband and I huggle, a combination of hugs and cuddles. And we also know that physical punishment is not a good thing. Unfortunately, some research indicates that parents in the USA, half of them spank their 12-month-old kids, which is just, so that's going to shift the trajectory of that child. Oh, it's unsafe, disconnected, boom, Now you've made them go in a different direction than if you had given them loving support. So there's lots of increasing amounts of evidence, cross-cultural meta-analyses, that spanking is the same as physical and emotional abuse. And you don't want to provide that, because then you're shifting that trajectory again. Positive climate. This refers to a social climate that welcomes the child. They feel like they belong. They can connect to others and make them laugh, and you feel cherished, and you have deep friendships. You learn all the nonverbal ways of getting along as a baby. It takes a while to get to learning language, because you have so many nonverbal things to learn, right? You watch, you observe, and you act. And so this is really important to develop then again, the positive emotions rather than negative emotions. Also good for everybody. We all need this. We all need to feel like we belong, that we are able to do something good for the community. Self-directed social play. This is free play. So it's social, and it's not organized by adults. So it's not soccer, but it's climbing trees, it's wrestling, it's chase, playing tag. And it's got all sorts of positive effects. A lot of animal studies show how it changes gene expression, makes you less aggressive, makes you more self-controlled, builds leadership, and so on, emotion regulation. And again, play is also good for all ages. In fact, it helps the right hemisphere grow. So if you were under cared for as a child, and some therapists talk about this, especially boys, men who come in with an empty nest with their wives, they find that the men tend to be more closed down. The woman's ready to see the world and be open and try new things, and the guy's like this. It's attributed to right hemisphere underdevelopment. Boys actually need more of this nest than girls. They're slower to mature, take longer to just have less built-in resilience. And so we can see that men especially need lots of mothering and loving and nurturing. But playing helps you build that right hemisphere, because it keeps you in the present moment. You have to run around, play tag with a child. It's growing all these things, right? So it's very exciting to be doing that. I highly recommend it. Allomothers, these are allo parents, other mothers, other nurturers. We all need help. So these evolved nest components are not intended for one person to carry out for a baby, right? That's crazy. Put a mom and a baby in a house. Woo, you're gonna have problems, because that's just too much for one person. Babies need care 24/7, right? So, and we've got evidence, of course, that children whose mothers perceive social support do better because of the mother being more responsive and less stressed. And we all need mentors throughout our lives. So I think it's not just the little ones, all of us. Then we have responsive relationships. This is throughout our lives. We need somebody who pays attention to us, synchronizes with our brain, mutually influential. In early life, it's actually shaping the brain. It's related to having good attachment. When you have someone who actually emotionally and cognitively is honest and responsive to you, and it's mutually responsive, and affects all sorts of brain wiring, emotional regulation, habitual patterns. Of course, this is good for all ages too. And in our lab, just briefly, we've asked, we have various studies and publications, but here's one where we asked, in the last week, what has the child experienced in terms of touch, positive touch? How much were they affectionately touched? How much negative touch did they get? How much outside self-directed play did they have? How much inside self-directed play? How much family togetherness in the home and outside the home? It was just like a little snapshot of what the nest is like for them at the moment. And these are 3 to 5-year-olds. And this is just one slide I'll show you. So on the left side are all the controls, plus the nest at the bottom, the EDMPR, the Evolved Developmental Niche Provision Report. Big, mouthy thing. And then on the right is the outcomes of the child, the 3 to 5-year-old. How socially attuned are they? How much do they enjoy being with others? How considerate are they? How imaginative? How happy are they? And that all makes the what we call latent variable sociality. All those things add into sociality, and we see that even after controlling for the parents' age, education, income, how responsive they are, which remember was one of the key ones too, then those 6 questions matter. How much play, how much togetherness, and what kind of touch they had was predicted. So the 2 asterisks mean it's significant. And we've asked adults too the similar questions. How much touch did you have growing up? How much play? How much family togetherness? And those 6 questions do a similar kind of thing. They show us then, we call the evolved nest history on the left side there. People with a greater nest, a higher quality nest, have more secure attachment. You have better mental health, so less anxiety and depression. They are better able to take perspectives of other people, and then they can be more relationally attuned. So you go around that. And then there's 2 negative routes. People with less of the nest history have less secure attachment, worse mental health, and either they go with worse perspective taking and then become self-protective, or they have more personal distress, they just withdraw, and their ethical orientation, meaning how they are with others habitually, is to withdraw. So these are not surprising things. It's just that people need data to believe it, right? And then we have nature connection. So nature connection is developing those caring relationships with the natural world. And we know guided that in the First Nations, this is just a part of who you are. You live in the natural world, and you Native American communities have stories about how important it is to honor the totem animals or other creatures in your landscape. And so you build a kind of an executive conscious awareness of the importance of the relationship, but you also do it by being immersed there in all the practices and the observations you've done, watching the elders and others. And this, of course, is good for all ages. And these are kinds of things that we can do now when we live in cities or not in these nice little communities. We can walk outside, sun, earth, garden, bird watching, all these things have some effect on building our nature connection and practicing gratitude as well, which is part of our heritage. We have a new paper that just came out where we did an experiment and had college students practice for 3 weeks these different kinds of things, one each day. And they increased in what we call Indigenous nature connection. So ecological empathy and ecological mindfulness. So really ecological attachment and earth-based wisdom follows Aldo Leopold's famous comment here: a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. It's a nice, succinct perspective that unfortunately our dominant culture doesn't attend to. So we need some healing, big time. So healing practices. In our traditional communities, there were trance, drumming ceremonies and trance dancing and other ways to heal, the healing circles, and to mend any disruption in the community. Of course, this is good for all ages. And if we look at those 3 kinds of mindset, global mindsets, this is what I've done with classrooms and schools and teachers and my own students, is if you've got that overactive survival system set, you get threat reactive easily. You've got to learn then some techniques for self-calming, so belly breathing and other ways to get yourself rewired. And we have a lot of students now that spend a lot of time, grew up with computers or TVs or cell phones or iPads, and they don't have that relational connection capacities like our ancestors, where it's fun to be with others. They kind of prefer to be alone, which is strange for a social mammal like us. So there's ways then to incorporate social joy in the classroom and other life spaces. And then we have to build a communal imagination. So we are taught all the time to think about ourselves in an individualist culture, consumerist culture. What do you want? Do it now. You know, all the slogans, have it your way. And so we have to make intentional efforts to actually shift people's mindset to think about how we are being good citizens to the school, to our community. How do we connect? How do we make those people feel better? How do we, you know, create bonds instead of thinking about ourselves? And so some of the sustaining healing life spaces, like a classroom, can do these kinds of things intentionally. So I think it's important to work, not assume that in this culture, in this society, we don't have kids coming in, most of them in good health or with well-being because of all the stress families are under and the focus of the society on making money. So what we've done in classrooms is we use this RAVES model and emphasize relationships, apprenticeship, virtuous role models, ethical skills, and self-authorship. This again is indigenous. This is how we learn. This is our heritage again. And we've done it then in schools where we emphasize, you know, having caring, responsive relationships with each child, engaging the emotions, fostering a secure attachment. Sometimes it takes longer with some students, but there are ways to heal, and relationships are the fundamental way to heal. Relational social climate. So we want people in the community feeling relationally connected, to feel calm, you want to encourage the pro-social actions, not self-centered ones, and meet the basic needs for belonging, autonomy, self-enhancement, trust, and meaning. So teachers can do that. Workplaces too. Apprenticeship, that's how we usually learn more easily. We have a model of an expert. You want to speed it up, then the expert thinks out loud while they're solving problems and coaches the student, explaining, and then the student, of course, always has to practice extensively to develop their expertise. The Virtuous Village provides all sorts of role models who demonstrate generosity, respect, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, humility, and courage. These are traditional values. And the students, the young people, all of us need to see these examples all the time. We need to practice, and then we have get opportunities to imitate. So these are part of our heritage too. And then we go into much depth on ethical expertise, all sorts of skills and sub-skills in these areas of being developing ethical sensitivity. So I apply this to also to the natural world. How do we develop our ethical sensitivity to nature connection and being respectful of all our relations, making ethical judgments, and that with that communal mindset, being ethically focused, which means that Indigenous worldview, and then completing action. We need to practice and learn how to be effective in how we carry out action. And then finally, the last RAVES part is self-authorship. Virtuous individuals have to be able to monitor their own behavior and choices eventually. Although Aristotle pointed out it's probably age 30, maybe that would be the soonest you could do that. Before then, you've got to have a lot of mentorship. But I think all of us need mentorship all the time. So yeah, so that's the RAVES model that we applied in Minnesota when I used to live there and work at the University of Minnesota with teachers across the state. Now, let's just do a little more on the Indigenous healing. Notice here the traits of a flourishing individual. This is from Coyote Guide, John Young's group, the 8 Shields. They've gathered wisdom from around the world, the San Bushmen in particular. And this is what a flourishing person looks like. They have a quiet mind, they're happiness, they're vital, they listen unconditionally, they have empathy, authentic helpfulness, they're fully alive, and they demonstrate love. I don't see a lot of people like this in our culture. There's once in a while, but this is our heritage again, and this is what the records of first contact with Native communities around the world, this is what they saw, those European diarists. So how do we get back to this? There are Indigenous healing practices that Rupert Ross has compiled with a lot of help from, well, the elders of these communities. And so he mentions these 10 things: focus on spirit, focus on strength, right? Our spiritual gifts, our responsibilities that we were given. We are in duty bound to honor them. And healthy people involves establishing good relationships with everything and accommodating others with openness, humility, and respect. Healing happens in a group. You don't usually do it alone. That's the individualistic society that kind of pushes us that way. But traditionally, healing is a group thing because the whole group has been hurt by, by someone's action. Individual health is grounded in that social healing then. We are, in this worldview, we are all connected, and our relationships have to be in good shape for us to be whole and healthy. The emotional is really vital. Healing comes through heart learning. So it's transformative, right? Learning is transformative. It's not just knowing something in your head. You've got to actually be transformed when you learn and when you heal. Ceremonies are vital for this. It calms the so-called reptilian brain. We like to have, and then it honors it. It puts out the right kind of energy to the universe. First Nation healers are humble. They don't assume they know how to generalize for everybody. They are very contextualized, and then they try to always connect with those who are in the community who know better about what that community needs. And then there's respect for everyone's worth. Everyone's assumed to be born into sacredness, goodness, and kindness. Can you imagine if our country treated everyone with that worldview? We wouldn't be having a Black Lives Matter protest, because we would honor everyone's sacredness. And with hard work, then we can nurture our spirit, learning to recognize our gifts, honor our responsibilities. Talking is not always necessary. Sometimes healing happens out in the natural world, berry picking, walking through the forest, making art, storytelling. There are other ways other than that left brain kind of, conscious mind, the monkey mind. You don't have to talk to the monkey mind to heal. You can talk to the whole, you can immerse the whole being in ways that are healing. And the importance of land then for healing. To learn how to accommodate to all your relations, to go out and, be out there in the natural world for 3 days or something. So you can connect to the more than human world. In our, see, I should probably stop, huh? But
Yeah, it's awesome. We could keep going if you have
I
more.
have just a couple more minutes, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
All right. Okay. So in my book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, I contrast these two kinds of wisdom. Traditional wisdom is what the Christian mystical traditions developed when they had adults who needed to be healed. Primal wisdom is our indigenous worldview wisdom. So you can see that there's shared properties across both of them, that wisdom exists beyond intellect. Your thinking mind can mislead you, so don't hang out there. Wisdom accesses other realms. We have special responsibilities as humans. We have choice. We can make choices, right? So we co-create by our actions. Practice of wisdom involves surrendering to the energy realm, to the powers beyond us. It requires ego detachment. Don't get caught up in me, right? Wisdom is state dependent. You have to be in this calm state in order to be able to access those energies. And oneness occurs in love. Fear has to be overcome then, which is the opposite. Now, then you notice that there's some differences down below. Compassion for the indigenous is towards all of the natural world, whereas in the Western tradition, it's just people. The focus in the indigenous tradition is all forms of life, and the focus for the Westerners is humanity. What's feared, which is quite interesting, is alienation from animal nature in the indigenous view, right? We are animals, we're connected to all the animals, right? All the plants too. And then in the Western tradition, oh no, the animal nature, scary. So I think I attribute that to all the miscare and undercaring for kids. And so then they see a baby so needy they think it's evil. It's just happened. It's crazy. And then the key behavior, let's see, I think, yeah, the key behavior is that gift sharing is just a given. You have to share your gifts. Whereas in the Western tradition, it's hospitality. You have a choice, right? The magnanimous man. All right, so our cycle, our heritage is to provide companionship caregiving, number one, leads to a good physio-neurosocial biology, which leads to adults who have well-being and wisdom, and they then create a culture, communities that attend to basic needs and keep the cycle going in that direction. And one of the important things here is to remember our stories matter. We need to move back to a sacred life and living earth story. Right now we're in the sacred money and market story, and that then drives us in the wrong direction. Eva Corton has written about that. And remember, our baselines have shifted. Until the last 400 years, a third of the globe was occupied by small band hunter-gatherers, pastoralists, shifting cultivators, people with the indigenous worldview. And the state hegemony became dominant in 1600, in the year 1600. So it's only been a very short fragment of time that we've been in this strange worldview that's destroying the planet. So we can move back. We want to practice indigenous wisdom. Then this is the book that came out last year. Understand our earth rootedness, that we're relationally responsible to all, that we want to move with nature, not against it, to become matriots, Mother Earth, right? Patriots, matriots, give babies what they evolved to need, and then provide and look for wise mentoring and self-authorship to control those self-protectionist survival systems that can get activated if we're threat reactive, and then nurture that relational attunement and the communal imagination, which I mentioned. And then we can return to this cycle. We can intervene now at each point, providing intergenerationally for basic needs, providing that evolved nest for all ages, support balanced healing, build narratives and institutions that emphasize connection, and then always with the earth in mind, that we are all in this together and all our relations are dependent on us. Well, I mean, to be acting well anyway, the earth will continue without humans, but we need to be responsible and respectful. And we can follow then the original top way of being of more original species typical outcome is to be attuned to nature. We have somehow decided in the middle there that morality doesn't have to do with nature. And then with trauma, we drop down to the bottom there. We've got a lot of kids that are being traumatized, have been traumatized, haven't healed. And so they're down at the bottom, the species atypical outcome. We can heal though. And so everyone can think about how they can support the evolved nest provision, how they can help healing and connection. And there's some practical ways to implement the nest I'm not going to go through, but maybe people can pause the thing and look at this list if they're looking at this again. And I'm just going to flash by these just to remember we're shaped by the nest. Adulthood takes 3 decades, so we need mentoring all along the way. Community support is vital. And our social moral development is rooted in our neurobiology. Stress makes us stupid, in effect, and selfish. And we don't have to be that way once we understand the nest can be provided and can keep us in a healing and healthy state. Books and more information. Find us at evolvednest.org. That's where I'm putting my time now. I just retired from Notre Dame. I'm emerita now, so I'll have to say that. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think Shoshone would say the same. I don't think we want you to stop. That was wonderful and so informative and so, I think, relevant to our work in these times of trying to support youth and families, and especially those that are struggling. That are often the ones that are struggling the most are often the people that were struggling the most before this pandemic and hit. And so thank you so much for that. I really appreciate what you had to say and the time and energy that you put into the presentation. One of the questions that I'm having, because, we do a lot of therapy, individual therapy, individual work, but group therapy as well. And, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and attachment is really sort of a buzzword and has been a buzzword. And so, you've mentioned it throughout your presentation, but I was wondering if you can unpack a little bit of how that attachment looks differently in many Indigenous communities. The attachment that people like Daniel Siegel or Alan Shore talk about, and how it's different in many Indigenous communities, or how different it is.
I mean, in healthy ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Alan Shore tends to focus in on the one attachment, primary attachment figure, the mother. But our heritage from the anthropological studies that have been done, they notice that that child gets attached to all sorts of people in the band, right? And there are different levels of attachment. And I think at several months, like 8-month-olds, they're half the time they're not being held by the mother. It's someone else. And they develop responsive relationships, and they avoid the people that aren't responsive to them. And not everyone's going to have a responsive relationship, right? So I think what really is our heritage is to have a sense of bonding to a band of people, but also to the natural world. That's the thing that I think the Western psychology is missing. They kind of forget we are nature creatures, and nature makes us feel at home too in our traditional societies. So that would be then very calming. So now we have kids who have only grown up with attachment to mother, let's say in their house, or maybe someone else too. And then those people die. It's like they have nothing, right? So it's like gone. Now their bonds are gone. So it's really important to get back to the heritage of feeling bonded to lots of people and to the natural world. So even if you lose all of those people, you're still bonded to the world, to nature, right? So.
And that makes sense. And I guess one follow-up, and then I know Shoshone had a question, is, for those that are tuning in that are maybe sort of clinicians or people that are impacting policies or what programs get funded, it seems like the science that you're talking about is showing that different therapeutic interventions can have the same impact on, let's say, brain development, emotional regulation. And that means such things as getting out in nature, such things that are not just talk therapy. Is that kind of what you think science and using their own words, which is like the hard science is showing?
Yeah, I feel it depends on what you're looking at, right? So, but if you look at physiologically, cortisol levels go down when you spend 20 minutes lying on the ground. Your oxytocin levels probably go up as well since they're interactive. But so there's various things they're starting to discover. So with pets too, I guess, even though pets aren't really wild animals, but they are at least other than you.
And so it would be also like indigenous practices that have, such as singing, chanting.
Oh, yes.
Those things are therapeutic.
Yes. So the vagus nerve, I cut out a bunch of slides, and one of them was the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve that's related to all the major systems of the body. It keeps you healthy, the heart healthy, immune system healthy, brain healthy, and chanting and humming. These are ancient traditions in some of the religions, to hum or chant, and that tunes up the vagus nerve. So it's actually very healing to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Shoshone, I want to throw it over to you. I see we have a little bit of time. You have a couple minutes to take some more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I got so much out of it. And I think it really ties in a lot of the information that we have, and then also expands upon it very beautifully. I wanted to read a comment from, actually it's a question from one of the commenters on Facebook. Dessa Gunning asked, is there a way for us to have a copy of the PowerPoint is filled with Lots of information. Thanks for sharing with us. I spent many years working with parents and children services. What a wonderful reminder to practice active parenting skills. Um, so that was one request. And then I had a question also.
So I don't know how
And
you want to handle the
Oh.
PowerPoint. I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. Can I give you a copy to you to share?
Yeah,
or
I think
does
that'll
that
work. And then
work?
we could put it a link to like our website or something and put it on there. And then also give a little more information on where people can find you. Because I think your website is great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I don't have all the references in the PowerPoint, so if they need to know a reference, they'll have to ask me, I guess, or look at a publication. Thank you.
And then the question that I had is in providing therapy, sometimes there's it's kind of controversial. Some people believe that like psychotherapy is very or psychoeducation is a very useful tool, and then some therapists believe that psychoeducation is not needed, or so I'm wondering, with the information that you gave, would it be, in your opinion, beneficial to kind of break down some of those, like you're talking about neuroinception by situation, or talking about just the evolved brain and how that functions? Do you think that would be a beneficial thing for some clients?
Yes, I think so. It probably depends on the client. I would start with the self-calming techniques, right? So, and get them tuned in to when you're starting to feel anxious, right? Your jaw is starting to tighten, your shoulders are going up. Okay, you're going into this mode now, it takes a lot of practice to learn to recognize it and then to learn to calm it down, right? Take a deep breath, do some humming, chanting. So I think it depends on the client, how old they are, and so the people who are more kind of guided by their conscious mind would benefit from all that. Those who are more creative, probably you don't want to talk, right? You want to have them do art or do uh, some nature connection outside, walking, or so it's going to vary. It's hard to make a general recommendation.
Thank you for that.
I guess one thing too that I have that's coming up is with this idea of evolved nest and sort of creating that nurturing environment that's wired into who we are as as human beings. Do you find that across socioeconomic status that have you tied that into some of your research? That I would guess that some of the insecure attachment, some of the other factors that lead to not so much healthy development, like where does that the class and socioeconomic status come into play on some of your research?
We usually control for that in our analyses, so we don't look at it specifically. We haven't, since this evolved nest is sort of relatively new concept and we don't have big samples, so huge samples like thousands and thousands of people. But I can say that because from my students' experience with students, privileged often students at Notre Dame, that some of them have insecure attachment, and it's not a class necessarily related thing. I think because it's common for wealthy people to neglect their kids too, and maybe the lower class people actually have a community around them. And so there's more allo parents, there's more other nurturers, and maybe more play even. And the wealthy families think their kids have to be scheduled up all the time and cognitively developed, and then they lose their heart sense, right?
Yeah.
So, but the lower class may have that heart sense still because of their early life. So I think it's hard again to make generalizations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess what's coming up for me. I'm about ready to be a father again here in the next
Ooh,
3 to 4 weeks, and one of
congratulations.
the things, yeah, thank you. And one of the things, I think, we have some people tuning in with around early childhood development, and especially in those first 3-4 years. And I came across you saying that babies shouldn't be crying.
Right.
Like could you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was really interesting or important piece of advice.
Well, in traditional societies, they don't let babies cry. In one case, one of the anthropologists who spoke at one of my conferences wrote about this, or maybe she talked about it, that as soon as they heard a cry, something like that, everyone, all the adults were saying, pick up the baby, pick up the baby. In part because it seems to be that babies can't stop crying. They don't have the mechanism to stop. So once they start, they keep going and going. But it's also what it's doing to the body. You remember, the biochemistry has to be in optimal shape. You want to keep the baby in a calm or happy mood. You're growing that personality. So then the biochemistry, the neurons are growing quickly, thousands of synapses a second, and they will grow in a positive biochemistry. But if you have them distressed, the biochemistry shifts and things don't grow. Instead, you're going to melt. Cortisol will melt the brain connections, synapses, and you don't know what you're missing. You don't know what's supposed to be growing at that moment. So why would you risk it? And the baby will potentially, if it happens routinely, will learn to be disconnected. They will go and dissociate. They will be rageful. They'll go into the survival system. It's enhancing those, right? Panic or fear or rage. And then you're going to have problems later. So babies expect to be carried all the time. They expect to be physically on you 24/7. And I think that's really hard for Americans, especially if you have avoidant attachment. You don't want to touch people. You're trying to keep them away, arm's length, right? So it's, we're kind of in the conundrum now. Babies they haven't evolved away from being a social mammal with all these needs, but we've created a culture where adults are detached. So we have to somehow get those wise elders back who will hold the baby all the time, the grandmas and grandpas, right? Who love the baby and won't be so caught up in trying to make them into something, but just accept them.
Thank you. And I guess, Shoni, did you have something?
Yeah, that just kind of reminded me also of that indigenous knowledge and the cradle boards and the baby baskets and, swaddling the babies, so that I think you called it the external womb, that we're
Right.
kind of extending that, so that it is very practical, right? You do have things you have to do in order to run a household or to run a village, but that the baby still has that. And so that just speaks to that indigenous knowledge and then also the saying, it takes a village, and then that literally was life back then, but also the way that we built into the system these other things to utilize in order to foster that environment for that baby.
Yeah, you never leave the baby alone. But we do that routinely in this country. We think, their own room, their own crib, their own whatever playpen, leave them alone. They have to learn independence. No. It's the opposite, right? If you don't let them be completely dependent initially, their body won't learn independence later. They'll be, suckers for authoritarianism. All sorts of things will go wrong. We can't predict it exactly, but there's one other thing I wanted to say. Sometimes people with obsessive compulsive disorders, they want to wash their hands a lot. There was a study done where they they looked at the brain, and they could see the short circuit in the brain going off when this woman wanted to wash her hands. And the therapist said, okay, next time you feel like washing your hands, go put your hands in the garden just for a minute. Okay, so she did. And then, okay, now the next week, all right, do it for 2 minutes. Do it for 5 minutes. Kept increasing the amount of time, and they kept looking at her brain. And after 15 minutes, she did it for 15 minutes. She didn't want to wash her hands anymore, and her brain looked different. So there's probably, because the soil is healing, it's got antibiotics in it, traditionally. So I think there are ways, again, to use the natural world to allow the natural world into our relationships that are healing in ways that we don't hardly understand, right?
Thank you. So I see, we're about out of time. So I wanted to thank you again. And for those of you that have made comments, questions, we'll answer those on Facebook, and we will, I think there's 3 or 4 people that asked for the PowerPoint. So, we'll make a comment on this, where the video will be about how you'll be able to get that PowerPoint. And we also want to let everybody know that we have the speaker series continuing on Thursday with Dr. Gene Rhodes out of University of Massachusetts, Boston, one of the foremost leaders on mentorship. And so look out for the flyer. And again, thank you so much, Darcia, and thank you, Shoshone. And I want to throw it right back at you if you have any last words, Dr. Narvaez.
Well, thank you so much for letting me be with you. And I hope this has been a blessing to you in some fashion, and that we can together heal the world and bring about the changes that are needed so we all feel connected.
Yes. All right. Well, Two Feathers is getting off live stream now.